Welcome to the Alternative Leader podcast. My name is Mary Williams and I'm the Mind Architect. I'm also founder of the Alternative Leader Academy and author of It Begins With You. This podcast is dedicated to inspiring the leaders of today to lead with intention, both in their personal and their professional lives. My guests from across the world share their challenges, their knowledge and their experiences so that we can learn from these powerful insights to help us lead with strength, determination and compassion. Welcome to the Alternative Leader podcast. My name's Mary Williams and I'm the Mind Architect. Today I'm speaking with Phil Jones. Phil is Managing Director of Brother UK Limited. He's worked his way up from being the council house kid, as he calls himself, to working in pubs where people were being shot at and he was nearly set alight, to going all the way through business, buying his first big chunky brick mobile phone, all the way up to managing director. Phil talks about his journey of himself, learning who he was and therefore the leader that he could be, learning to adapt and change himself around others to make them comfortable in the relationships that he was building. He talks about having total acceptance of self, learning to understand yourself and to take all of those things that have come up through your childhood and your past and turning them into strengths to move you forward to being a great leader. Phil is really passionate that everybody is given a chance to succeed and that no one holds themselves back from having a limiting belief ceiling. Let's hear from Phil about his journey from council house child all the way up to managing director and how he had to manage that painful transition to acknowledging who he was and how he had to change. So Phil, I'd like you to sort of lead us on your story because it's a sort of almost a rags to riches story, but I know that you're really keen for everybody to realise that they can sort of take the same journey that you have. So tell us a bit about your story.
The story started in Berkshire. I was born in Slough, and my mother and my father, who were only together a few years before they eventually divorced. So we ended up moving around quite a lot for that reason, actually. So we moved from Windsor to then a place called Datchet and then to a place called Bracknell in Berkshire. And we moved about 4 times in Bracknell. So wow. One of the sort of the key things about myself growing up was that we moved house a lot, which is very interesting. But I think also when I look back at my life, I realised I was working from a very young age, Mary. I was doing milk rounds at about age 9 because my stepfather was a milkman.
Right.
So I was always going out delivering milk, and if I wasn't with him, I'd be on the local golf range collecting balls. And I started at Waitrose at 16, stacking biscuits. So kind of my whole life was really sort of in and around Berkshire, and we didn't really have much. I mean, I think it's fair to say my mum lived in a council house, and she soon separated from my then stepfather and became a single mum again. There was myself, my elder sister, and my younger brother, who's my half brother from her second marriage. And I didn't do well at school. I could have walked out of my school life with about 3 O-levels at the time. And my mum said to me, and I think it's a great gift she gave to me at the time, because I was all ready for walking away and just saying, I'm not academic, Mum. I just can't do it. I find it too hard. And she said, look, you've got to go back and do the 6th year. You've got to go and do your maths and your English again. And oh my goodness, I was really upset and I was annoyed and I was angry. But I did, and I went and did that year, and I managed to scrape through, which then carried me through to do a BTEC in business at Bracknell College.
Right.
And that was, I think, a real tipping point for me in my life, because growing up through school, I didn't really have much in the way of confidence. You look at me and there's nothing, I'm not going to make the cover of Men's Health, Mary, anytime soon. And, I was bullied a lot at school because I wasn't conforming, I wasn't great looking or the most confident individual. And as a result, when I kind of came to Bracknell College, what I realised was that actually you were treated much more as a grown-up. So you'd come from this sort of slightly authoritative school environment to suddenly you had a little bit more bandwidth to do what you wanted to and become who you wanted to be. So I had a fantastic couple of years there. And then my mum said, look, Lou, you really need to go to university, Phil. And I'm like, do you know what? I'm not sure if I can. And at the time I was working in a pub, Mary. And I used to love the pub. I used to love meeting the people, the characters. It was dynamic, it was fun, and it was very social. And what I was realizing was that I kind of had a personality that people liked. And that was probably wow, people really like me, and people, I was having great conversations with people and building friendships with people in the pub. And at the time, we had a temporary manager come who was a sort of troubleshooter for the pub group. And because the person who was running the pub had retired, she came in as a troubleshooter just to sort of temporarily manage the pub. And she was going somewhere else. And so she said, look, how would you fancy a career in the pub trade? If you do, I'm about to move over to this pub over in Dagenham in Essex, and you could come with me and maybe you could start a career there. So I decided to do that.
Right.
I didn't go to university, as mum sort of was really trying to encourage me to do. And I went off to Dagenham to work in the pubs. And that was a great education for me, because actually what I ended up with was in a very, very rough pub. It was a very big pub, but it was notorious for being very, very violent, drug dealing. It was violent. And while I was there, I saw a number of things. I saw somebody shot. Was regular fights, drug dealing. It was all sorts going on. And the tipping point to me leaving there was one night when we had to bar somebody who said, you're not going to be alive in the morning. I'm coming back to torch the place.
Oh my gosh.
And that evening while I was in bed, because I actually lived above the pub, all I could hear was stones at the window and somebody saying, the pub's on fire. You need to get out. And actually that person was good to their word. They'd come back and actually set the pub on fire.
Wow.
So it was that point really where I realized, you know what, I am doing all these hours, 70, 80 hours a week for all this grief, and this just isn't worth it. It's just not worth the money, the time, or the effort, and I'm not happy. So I ended up going to Tottenham Court Road. On my day off, I walked in the first place that I saw, which was called a recruitment consultant, said, I'm looking for a job. And they said, okay, what have you done? And they offered me a role as a trainee salesperson. And I thought, well, I've got no other choice. And I took it. And that was the start, I guess, of my career in sales, career in business, and the trajectory which ultimately took me to where I am today.
That's fascinating, isn't it? What do you think? I was interested that the BTEC that you took was business. What drew you to business? Because as you said, that wasn't a model that you had. So I just wondered, what was it?
I think it was probably working all those years in and around, I was fascinated when I was on the milk round about how the milk business worked. I was, how did the dairy work and how did it all commercially happen? And then when I got to Waitrose and then to Sainsbury's afterwards, I managed to elevate myself from biscuit stacking into the warehouse at Sainsbury's to support myself through college. You just saw commerce up close. And actually, it was something that I thought, well, I quite like this. I like understanding how this all works. And what I was realizing was that in that environment, I could do okay. And so it just sort of seemed like a natural home, really, to sort of have a broad understanding of business, which might springboard me somewhere.
It's interesting, isn't it? I do notice that a lot of people that I see kind of at the top in business, it's a natural interest for them. And I know, I was saying to you that I've always had that natural interest in business and how it works. And I often say to people, I love what I do, but I also love the workings of what I do. I find it absolutely fascinating. And it's also interesting, isn't it, that the pub work showed that sort of natural, sort of ability to get on with people and to understand people. And actually what you then did was kind of combine those two loves, really, didn't you, in sales? You're bringing your people and your business together.
Yeah, I mean, when sometimes you talk about sales, people often think, oh, you've got to have this sort of Del Boy style gift of the gab, and you've got to coat that you open with watches in, and you try and convince people to do things that they don't want to do, and all this sort of stuff. But what I realised was actually selling is just simply about great relationships. Is when you can build great relationships, understand people's pains, and come up with great solutions to the pain points people are experiencing, then you can become pretty good at it. And all those years in the pub trade, what you were doing often is just listening to life stories all the time. And often, as later the night went, Mary, of course, the deeper the stories became. Because the alcohol would kick in, and often people's real truths would begin to come out. So you sort of became almost part counsellor, part barman. And I think that was a sort of an unintended consequence, I guess, that I was beginning to sort of develop this, I guess, empathy for listening to people at that time, and know how to develop relationships with people very, very quickly, because anybody that might walk into the public bar at that time, you didn't know whether they're going to be an East End gangster or someone that's just walked by and just popped in for one. You just never knew. So you were always very wary, and always, I guess, looking to understand people, code people quite quickly, and know where you can find that common ground with somebody to begin to develop rapport as part of the relationship building process. So I think looking back, it was probably a great gift that I had all of those years, which probably helped me a lot later in life.
I was just thinking the same. It's a bit of a kind of fast and dirty route to relationship building, isn't it, really? How do you learn it best? Where you learn it where there's a sort of almost a survival instinct and you're being able to understand and communicate with the people around you.
There was at times, I can tell you, in that public bar, because certainly if it was Saturday afternoon and it was football, it was a West Ham pub effectively. So the place would just fill up with West Ham fans, and hopefully, crossing fingers, they won that day. And if they didn't win, we always knew that we'd be in for a very tricky evening, because of course, it would become a very toxic environment. People really overconsume alcohol. There would invariably always be a fight of one kind or another. And we always had panic buttons on the bar, Mary. So literally, we'd press the panic button, and a van full of police people would sort of bust through the door within 15 minutes, and it was quite something. So you were dealing with very, very inflammatory situations quite a lot of the time.
And sorry, go on.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that in itself becomes a skill on how to de-intensify a situation and kind of get people calming back down again. And equally, I realized that, even my later business life, just the ability to spot situations before they start going, or defuse something once it's going, is probably a great competency that probably I built again back in those days, really, as a 21-year-old in Essex.
Yes. Well, that's what I was going to say, was have you then found that has been so useful in business? I know, part of my role is helping people communicate with their team, spotting that just as it's going, so that you don't get to conflict, that actually you head conflict off at the pass. So yeah, that's very interesting. And it's an interesting thing. It's such a sort of baptism of fire, isn't it, to learn it in that context. So tell me, how did it feel to you when you suddenly were in this sort of more corporate environment? So you've come from this sort of background, then you've gone through pubs, and now you're in this really kind of corporate background. How did that feel sort of different to you?
Yes, it was everything really. The entire conventions of how life worked changed, because of course there's certain conventions of how a workplace works, and I walked into that, and at the time it was the early 90s. The office was in the City of London. It was very much at that sort of greed is good time. We were selling fax and copiers, and it was at a time when there was a lot of money being made, and a lot of the guys in the company were driving Porsches and Ferraris, and I sort of walked in as this lad that had nothing, and I saw everyone in these expensive suits and shirts and these amazing vehicles, and I just thought, it was a different world to me, Mary. It was a different world, and that transition into that world was initially very difficult. because I had nothing.
Yeah.
I didn't have money to buy expensive suits or anything. And I can remember going to Mr. Byright, I think it was, which was the sort of the shop at the time where you could buy cheap suits. And all I could afford was a single suit. So I bought this pinstripe suit and a blue shirt and a red tie, and that almost became my uniform. And that gave me something. So that became a uniform which to some degree helped my confidence in that environment. But really what that environment was all about was performing. All they really wanted was results, get on the phone, smash the phone, do this, do that. And so I kind of just learned really that it was about the work rate that you apply. So if you were shown to have a good work rate, then your sort of internal currency began to improve. You could improve your currency further, obviously, by then dressing in a more expensive uniform. So as I was able to, earn a bit more money, I went and bought a better suit. And my crowning day was when a guy came to the office one day, and it was just at the start of sort of mobile phones, Mary, and he bought a big box of Motorola phones, the bricks with the aerials out.
Yes.
And I was able to afford to buy one.
Wow.
And I bought this phone, and Mary, it was the making of me. My chest went out. Here was me finally walking around with a mobile phone in my hand. And so it was, I guess, the start of that journey of beginning to understand how corporate cultures work, particularly. Yes. How humans work when they're together. And later in my life, obviously now, I lead a very large company. And I think what that taught me was at the time that companies are only really as good as the way that they organize and motivate people around the strategies they develop. That's what I really learned.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing that I think was my real big learning during that time was there was quite a lot of dysfunctional characters in that. A lot of big egos, a lot of huge egos, and there was a lot of time spent managing big egos in that area. And later in my working career, what that's also taught me is how impactful large egos can be in your organization. To some degree, taking up far more time. Yes. To manage the ego than you're getting potentially in output. And I saw that firsthand in the early 90s and just saw that and thought, there's times when we don't work particularly well together because everyone's sort of butting heads all the time on things that actually are quite simple, but their egos just take them somewhere when it doesn't need to go. And I think that was a great lesson from my early part of my sales career.
I think the ego is quite interesting because I think a lot of people assume that those people who are showing those sort of huge egos, it's an enormous confidence. And actually, I know, and you probably know this from being around it, often it's actually incredibly low self-confidence. And so they have to come out almost fighting to be seen, to be heard, because actually if I tune in with how I really feel, I'm going to kind of crash or burn in a different way. So it's interesting, isn't it? And then what you have as a model where everybody that doesn't realize that is looking up at those people thinking, I want the suit, I want the car, I want the lifestyle, and actually not realizing that it comes with this actually kind of awful feeling of not being good enough.
Yeah, I think there was an awful lot of that. And probably in my early 20s, my goodness me, I'd have done anything to have a Guards red Porsche 911, and to be running around in it. I would have done anything for that. It just seemed like the ultimate in achievement to get there. But I guess as maturity takes over in your life, as you gain a bit more life experience, and probably as you also look within a bit more as a person, you begin to find about kind of, well, what things define you and what don't. And I think that journey of defining, well, who are you really and what makes you happy, what really makes you congruent as an individual can be a mesh of all of those things. It can be about having a great car because you just like having a great car and it makes you happy and you enjoy the driving experience rather than it defining something about you or materially. So it's not to say those things are bad things. It's about where they fit in your overall congruency as a person.
It's interesting because I think it's about drive, isn't it? So I know when I trained to be a therapist, I remember my trainer saying, if you go back into your childhood and you clear that emotional baggage and you do that, actually all of those drives, they'll reduce down. And I remember thinking, hang on, it's my drive that pushes me forward, and it's my drive that's helped me get where I am. And maybe I don't want to sort out my emotional baggage if it's going to take that away. And he said, no, if that's truly something you want to do, you'll do it, but you'll do it from a really healthy place. And actually, therefore, your drive will become stronger. And so I often have clients who they have the same behavior because they have the same worry. And I say, no, it's just the pathway to that behavior will change. Like you say, if you love cars and you want to have 10 sports cars, that's fine, as long as it comes from I just love cars, rather than hopefully this will show people how amazing I am. And it's an interesting difference, isn't it? And I often say to people, you might notice your behavior changes, your behavior stays the same. And so actually some people might not always notice the difference, but you will, because you will feel healthier about whatever it is that you're doing, and it will come from within, rather than, as a lot of people do, worrying what other people think of them.
Mary, it's so true. It's such a good lesson for life. I went down the route, firstly, probably in my 20s, of just being having high levels of achievement orientation, which I think maybe we all do in our 20s.
Yes,
so it's kind of like, that's just part of the journey, isn't it? But I guess as I moved into my 30s and my 40s, and where I think you become more sort of purpose and out, bigger picture driven than you are necessarily about, collecting things or just achieving. You can still have these great senses of achievement driven by something different, which might be bigger. I totally get that now.
Yeah.
And I guess in the early part of my career, I can remember that I worked with a business psychologist, Mary, and that was, again, completely by accident. I brought that individual in to try and help me at a time where I felt a bit underskilled, and I'd just been appointed sales director at Brother, and I'd never really led managers. I led a team of just people, but now I was becoming a manager of managers, and I really I felt a bit out of my depth. So, but serendipitously, I won't tell the whole story because it can be a bit long, but serendipitously, I ended up in a room with a business psychologist. He was a sports psychologist, but he wanted to transition into business. And so he wanted to bring his framework from sports world into business world. And we I really got on with him, thought he was a great guy, was interested in the model. But as part of that, I hadn't realized I was about to subscribe to 100 days worth of, well, there's no way you can lead them until you can lead yourself.
Yeah.
And that led to a really, really tough period in my life, actually, giving that consent to, okay, all right, I get what you're saying. What does this actually mean in reality? Well, what means we're going to sort of depack everything about how you perform and sort of understand it all and then try and rebuild it all. But as part of that process, Mary, what I realized was actually even my behavior at that time was not achieving much in terms of me getting the outcomes I wanted in my career, because what I was probably doing was just, I was so achievement orientated that it was like achieve the goal at any cost, despite the people I work with. So as part of that process, Stephen Sylvester is his name. Stephen said, look, you need to go and make some positive inquiry with people about what they really think about you at work. And I had this image of one respect of, I think I'm really well liked, I'm a nice guy and all this sort of stuff. And I went away and did the calibration, Mary, and just heard this devastating bucket of feedback that actually it's like, you don't really care about us. You just care about achieving what you want to achieve at any cost. And we are just simply resources called people you work with to achieve your goals. Oh my God, I was devastated, Mary. I was devastated. But it was the feedback I needed to hear, because what I realized was actually my actions were creating unintended consequences, negative unintended consequences at a time when I wanted people to feel like they wanted to work for me, work with me. And actually what I realized was I was getting the opposite of what I wanted. So in that period, we went through a lot of recalibration, which was very, very painful. Lots of nights crying in the corner of a pub in Newton-le-Willows on a Monday night, where a difficult question would come, where you have to face an uncomfortable truth. And it was funny about week 3 that the landlord would be there. We'd walk in at 7 o'clock, and he'd sort of go, "Corner table." He'd observe what was happening, and this was slightly more than just a Monday night drink. It was literally sort of a session where I was really beginning to face the big questions, and I think that was a tipping point too, Mary, where I became recalibrated, that actually away from achievement orientation into more of a life purpose type of model that worked for me, which was you can still achieve great things. But how you go about it, you can change and still get it all. How about that? And I thought, well, that model means a lot more to me.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I agree. And I think, obviously with the work I do, I think it's work every single person should be doing, especially if they're leading. And I, in my book, I always sort of say, you're leading yourself, and then you're leading as a partner. You might be leading as a parent, you might be leading within your community, and then you also might be leading within your work. And you have to think of yourself as leading and modeling within all of those roles. And like you say, actually, when we feel safe and happy and cared for and respected, we're more efficient because we're happier and we work harder anyway. So when you have employees who are looking at you thinking, wow, you don't actually care about me at all, they actually, in some respects, without them even being aware of it, you're switching their brain into a mode where they're not going to work as effectively anyway. I was actually recording a podcast with somebody yesterday, Terry, and we were talking about emotional safety within the team. And actually, if you have emotional safety within the team, it doesn't really take a lot of extra hours, but you actually just, even if you did look purely practically and financially, you get so much more out of your team. But you have, an enormously loyal group of followers. And I think, I've watched it's been interesting over COVID when I've watched companies who've had to, reduce pay or reduce hours, those that really care for their staff, work as a team, that the employees of staff have accepted that and actually been on board with that decision because they feel they're part of something. And when they don't, then obviously they're much more unhappy with that. And so I think if we had more people in leadership roles understanding that exactly who they are, it's not just the role, it's who they are, that is resonating out from them, and that is what people will pick up on. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because the other thing that I see in you is that you had almost this sort of clash of belief systems, because you had the belief system of you as a human, which is, of course, I value people and I like them and they're people and I, would be kind to them and all of that great relationship building stuff. But then you had this other belief, which it's interesting, the model that you came up through, isn't it? Actually results. And so actually it's interesting to me that there was this real clash between the two belief systems within you at the same time.
There was, and it took some time to reconcile that clearly, because you're operating in one model which at one particular point in time is serving you. I'm getting promoted, I'm coming through the business and I'm earning more money. Brilliant. But what I realized was it will only take you so far.
Yes.
It will only take you so far. And if you've got this sort of ambition or intention, I never had the intention or ambition to be managing director of the company. I never thought I was capable enough, actually, Mary. And I literally just thought when I got appointed sales director, I had complete disbelief that it was me that was chosen in that process. Never, ever thought I could have the skills to get to the top seat. But what I realized was that when I was sales director, is I was still displaying a lot of that behavior. And what I needed to do was transition into this. How can I be seen to be a candidate that might be being seen as a possibility to take that role? And at that point, my next step would be perhaps being appointed to the board. So to get to to get to be MD, you'd need to be appointed to the board. And I didn't have it as an objective. It just sort of happened. But that was because I had a very, very coaching-orientated Japanese boss at the time. He was a very caring individual, and he was giving me great feedback. And when I mean that, what I mean is an uncomfortable truth softly spoken.
Yes, lovely.
he'd get me and he'd tell me the things I need to hear in a way where it didn't make me derail.
Yes.
And I'd be able to see the point. And sometimes Japanese can be very good at that if you can find, that individual that has that ability to communicate in that way. And what he was then, communicating to me was look, I do need to be much more about the company, the board, the wider governance, and less about myself, which obviously from a Japanese society point of view is very much about the basic programming of the Japanese society. And when I began to learn that properly, again, I realised that actually there were elements that of my behaviour and that I needed to give up. I needed to make positive choices to not display certain behaviours. And equally, I became very conscious then about the footprint or the shadow that I left in all environments all the time. So when I'm in a room with Japanese, what am I leaving behind in terms of what I've said, how I've looked, how I've behaved, in order that they are looking at me thinking, oh, there's a candidate there that the future could be, rather than there's a candidate there that will never be.
Yes.
And again, that's just about situational awareness and having the situational awareness that wherever you are, whether you're home or professional or with friends, to be able to dial into that moment of, right, well, who's around me? How am I feeling right now? What's driving me? What's driving my behavior, my outcomes, my responses, my everything? And being switched into that state in that moment to be effective. And what I realised was that I am an extrovert, and I was also naturally positive or perhaps over enthusiastic. And what that was also doing was leaving a negative footprint at times with Japanese, because they were worried that I didn't actually have a sense of what the downside was all the time. They would show a goal and I'd go, oh yeah, we can take it, we can smash it, we can do it. And they were worried that they always got that response out of Barry. And so what I began to realise was that equally I need to change this language. And what I need to say is, oh, yes, well, it's a lofty goal or it's ambitious. And for us to achieve it, we might need to look at this. But if we can't do that, we might get here.
Yes.
And if that doesn't happen, our worst case scenario looks like this. And just changing the way that I then performed in certain meetings or environments became one of the keys with certainly the people above me whose job it was to appoint me. But what I then realised was in my my personal footprint and shadow with the people that I worked with, I realised that I just needed to be me.
Yes.
I just needed to be me, and I just needed to be human, and I needed to take away all of the corporate speak and the language and all this stuff and just start to get to make this more human again. And I think, again, that was probably a key for me in how we've been able to run the business and how I've now been able to lead the business almost with compassion. In our values at our place, the word compassion is there for me really front and center, that actually I need to display compassion for people and remind myself all the time that my role is not just to master the elements of the nuts and the bolts and the mechanics and the machine and all of these things that make a business work, but actually to understand that every single person that walks through our door has an individual life story. And when I can dial into that life story and understand what it is they're trying to get done, what our role is within that, and how we can help them in that life story, we get a greater level of discretionary effort, a greater level of engagement, a greater level of everything to help us to execute against the strategic objectives that we might want to achieve. For me, it's just become so simple that if you just got the right strategy, market, environment and resources, which we're global multinational, that's fine. But so many people have got that same thing, but they find it difficult to create the same outcomes we do. And when you understand why, it's because they don't spend enough time to really understand the people. So one thing that was a bit of an epiphany for me was that we were doing a review with our investors and people consultants, and we'd achieved platinum again, which was great. We'd got all of our staff feedback, Mary, all that good stuff. And somebody that I knew had come to see me and said, oh, we want to replicate this. We've seen all this successful stuff happening. We want this. And I said, well, look, just hang on a minute. What you're describing to me is it sounds like you think we're perfect. Let me tell you now that we are not perfect. Let me say the first thing about our organization is we're not perfect. And the reason is, and these words came to me and they stuck with me to this day, which was sort of inverted commas, all companies are dysfunctional. Successful companies simply manage their dysfunction more successfully.
That's great.
Close comments. So how, as an organization which has got people in it, not be dysfunctional? Because we've got all of these issues of personality clashes and things that are going on outside of work, cognitive distortion, self-image issues, every single day walk through our front door. So you can never run the perfect organization, in my opinion, but you can create the conditions for it to be better than most. Yeah. And I think being better than most is simply about how you bring sort of the heart, the emotion, the human, the person, to every single person that you work with. And that for me is only a byproduct, I guess, of the journey that I had to go through to unlock all of that, to see it properly, to then be able to do something about that when ultimately leading the company.
I think it's absolutely fascinating. Sort of initially what you were talking about being able to measure yourself, in those meetings, actually, how am I coming across? And what you're talking about is registering the impact of yourself on others, isn't it? Across all scenarios. And I think so I've always referred to myself as a positive realist, because if somebody tells me they're going to do something, almost the first thing I will look to is the negatives. And I have clients that come in and say, oh, I'm a catastrophizer. This is how it's been labeled. And I say, are you, or are you a double checker? Because for me, that's what it is. It's kind of saying, okay, is there anything I actually need to focus on and think about here? Is there going to be a problem with this? When I've sorted that out, then I'm like, okay, great. Now this is really exciting. Now let's go forward. And I saw, actually, I think this term positive realist has become a term. I think you can kind of Google it now and it comes up. But part of that, and a huge part of that, I think, is measuring how you are. And I'm like you, I'm a huge extrovert. And I've learned that I have to manage that around certain people. I could just go out into the world and just be myself all of the time. But actually, myself is also somebody who can manage that. And I think people sometimes worry that if they're not reacting in a meeting or a friendship group exactly as they wish to act, that they're not being true to themselves. And I'm saying, well, you're just using a different skill set that says, actually, maybe this person on the receiving end of how I would like to be is going to struggle with that version of me. And if I want to build that relationship, actually, I can use this other skill set of mine to bring it down or to bring it up or whatever it needs. And I think it's a very high level of emotional awareness for people who can manage that. And yes, people tend to see it as a negative of, well, I should just be allowed to be myself. And it's like, but other people should also be allowed to be them. And if they find that part of you, and I have friendships, where I have a kind of quieter friendship, and I have friendships where it's a kind of a louder friendship. And in business, this is just so important. And I see this within teams when almost invariably when someone comes and says, I don't get on with that member of my team, it's because actually they are not changing their behavior to that person. And I see it most if you have an extrovert team leader and then you have an introvert team member, because the team member will just stay quiet. And so then they're seen as not working very hard or not speaking in meetings and all of this judgment that we put on. And actually it's saying to the team leader, hang on, have you ever sat in their shoes and thought how it feels to have this kind of huge person in front of them and you're speaking fast to them, their brain's not processing. And I always say to people, when you have a meeting, try to have your meeting and then almost try to just wait 3 hours, because those people will go back to their desks and they will think everything through and possibly come up with something you haven't even thought of in that high speed time.
Mary, it's so key. nowadays, when we're making big decisions, I give it 3 days at least, and one day to tell everybody what it is we think we need to decide and start thinking about it. You know, a lot of the extroverts rock up on the second day, having not really done any preparation and just want to just get busy with post-it notes and banging out a million ideas, with lots of quiet people in the room not really doing anything. But then day 3, the reflectors process it all and often come back to me with the other things.
So powerful.
So what I found is that you know, that whole idea of go fast when you know, fast when you need to, and go fast when you must, and go slow when you can, is really key for me on decision making, because what it does is it brings in those personality types, those people who are reflectors, who can't create a million ideas on a flip chart and feel like they're being judged because they haven't come up with a single post-it note when sort of pinging them up on the wall. Oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. And they're all probably thinking, well, none of those will work, but look, you're on the stage at the moment, and I will naturally take the back role. So understanding that, this again, this just comes back to this really simple concept. I think just situational awareness. You know, where am I in this? Where are they in this? How do I need to recalibrate right now, or regulate myself in order to get the most out of this situation? And when you're leading teams and leading groups, or even just in a personal friendship, being conscious of your own bias, you know, for wanting to chat, be creative, coming up with lots of ideas. Nowadays, I have something just in my mind just called state management, and I can flip between these states. And go, okay, well, I'm seeing my friend on Thursday night, who I know is quite a deep reflector, who needs a lot of time to think about their thoughts before they speak. And me as a natural extrovert feel gaps, but I just switch myself off, and I just allow spaces and quietness to just be there. And 15 or 20 seconds later, out comes the comment. And again, that's just, I guess, just picking up that skill of you just need to understand in the third person that actually it's not always about you. It's about getting the right outcomes for quality conversations. And for me in my life now, my best conversations ever are the ones where I don't speak much.
Yes. You're reminding me of when I trained as a coach years ago. I mean, I'm known as being the chatty one, you know, my family and my friends. And I am probably over chatty sometimes. But I remember when I was training, one of the feedbacks I got was somebody said, you're very good at silence. You can sit in silence for like a full 5 minutes and you're just not fazed by it. And I remember coming home and telling my family, and they just went, really? You know? And it was, for me, because I'm very empathetic, it was easy for me to drop my energy to the person that I was with. And if they needed that space, they need that space. And I find it's a skill that's really been honed, because obviously I have a huge array of clients, from incredibly introvert people who are much slow processors to people who are kind of like bam, 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 bang in the room. And sometimes it is me having to sit there and think, hang on, I need to take a breath and tune back into them, almost like I've slipped out of it. And it's so important. And especially if you are somebody who's running large teams, it's healthy and positive to have a huge array of personality within that team. So if you can only manage one type of person, you're going to cut off an enormous resource. And I remember a leader I was working with a couple of years ago, and he said to me, I mean, he's a real go-getter, really energetic, I mean, a fantastic guy. And he said to me, how do I bring everybody along in my vision? You know, how do I bring them along with me? And I just said, well, if you want to go at the pace that you want to go at, you can do that, but you will only bring a certain type of follower with you. And I said, if you want to bring everyone with you, you have to slow down. And he said, oh, that feels so frustrating for you to tell me that, you know, almost sort of cross with me. And I said, it's just the truth. And I said, it's your choice. And if you decide to go, this is who I'm going to be, and these are the followers I'm going to put on, that's fine. But if you're working in a company, you are going to lose people. And you know, and he learned to slow down. You know, and it was a huge skill set for him. And he has now, you know, escalated up to the top of the company too. So I think it's absolutely fascinating, really. All of the things that you're saying, and it, you know, especially about having to deal with your own stuff, to become a better leader, to deal with that sort of emotional baggage. And we tend to look back, don't we? And we talk a lot about emotional baggage and how it holds us back. When you look back to your upbringing now and the challenges and struggles that you went through, what actually has really been so valuable for you from that childhood? What do you think actually almost every day that is something that makes me, good at what I'm doing now?
Although at the time we were poor, we had nothing, and we struggled. My mum struggled financially so much. One of the things that we did have is we had an ability to be out on the street at 7 o'clock in the morning and come back at 10 o'clock at night. And we had these bikes, and myself and a group of little posse would be going all over, doing all things. And we went, my mum, if she knew where we went, we'd be riding from Bracknell to Guildford on dual carriageways and all of these sorts of things. And what I guess that when I look back at it, there was a great freedom there.
Yeah.
There was actually an honest freedom in that upbringing, where actually through having nothing other than a bike, perhaps, I was able to have this sort of true joy of experiencing, going anywhere, doing anything at any time, within reason. It was only really our imagination that sort of stopped us, and perhaps our physicality, and there's certain places you couldn't ride to. So I think that was probably a great lesson in what personal freedom means. That although we get very tied down in our lives, later in our lives, of the machine, the grind, and buying houses and things and cars and bringing up families and all this sort of stuff, you must never forget, in amongst this, actually, I guess what I would describe as the soul. We've got, who actually am I beneath all of this? And what do I do to bring that alive?
Yes.
And whether that be music or reading or concerts or experiences or whatever, those are the times where I think I probably felt really alive. And even now I really look at that all the time and think very deeply also about making sure that in my life, although it's very busy and obviously has a lot in it, that there's time within that to also begin to never forget that you also have to experience that freedom yourself. And for me, you've got to have some colour in your life.
Yeah.
This weekend we went to a soul all-dayer on Sunday, and it was the first event we'd been to in 15 or 16 months.
Yes.
And, I danced for hours, Mary. I danced for hours. I loved it.
Yeah.
And I love soul music, and I love dancing to soul music. And I felt amazing to just sort of experience that. And people may hear that or sometimes look at me and say, well, that's not very appropriate for somebody that runs this large company, and you get all their judgment rocking up with you. But it's like, well, that's what makes me feel alive. And in order for me to be my best and to make great decisions, to lead people, you talked about energy just a moment ago, Mary, and for me, energy management as a leader is a very, very critical thing you must always think about.
Absolutely.
What's taking energy away? How are you recharging your energy? Where are you deploying it?
Yes.
More importantly, how do you deploy it? How do you regulate it when you deploy it? When does it need to be 10? When does it need to be 3? When are you at a 1 that and you need a recovery time? When are you at 10 and bouncing and perhaps need to pull that back? And so when you need to do that recharging yourself, for me, I've always found that it's not just about the classic things like good diet, sleep.
Yes.
And exercise, but actually also doing something that makes you remember who you are. Deep down as a person, and makes you feel alive. And that in itself can mean you can walk through a door on a Monday feeling that level of congruency across your whole life, which allows you to perform to a high level when you're around colleagues.
I think that's incredibly powerful. I always say to people, where are you being creative in your life? And it doesn't matter if they're creating code, whatever it is that is creative for them, whether it's dancing, singing, art, whatever, it's where are you being creative? And I kind of have this almost sort of belief that, if you completely stopped creativity, you would just, drop dead, because we need to have that in us. And absolutely, as you say, and I think actually movement is actually very, very important for us. You reminded me of a post I did, I think it was during lockdown, when, so many people were just working so hard and not going out and not seeing and not re-energizing. And I think I called my video energy points. And I said, let's say you wake up with 100 points in the morning, you're going to deplete that, 20 points gone on every Zoom call, etc. And I said, you have to be topping that up. And even if it's just staring out of the window and just taking a breath, that's 3 more points. Or if it's actually sitting and having lunch for half an hour or going out for a walk, how are you? And so it's really interesting to hear your kind of concept of the same thing. How do you replenish that side of you? And I know with myself, it's when I start to work too much, too long, and I love my work, I'm passionate about it. But when I don't switch off and go and garden or just sit and watch, junk telly with my kids or sing in my car, those things, then I don't bring as much energy into my work. And I think it's so important. And energy leadership, I never really thought of it in that term. But you're right, because, it just comes back to that thing, doesn't it? If the core you isn't okay, you just can't do your job properly, and neurologically you can't. Your brain won't be in the right place.
Well, that's the really key insight, Mary, that you've said there. For me, it's about your cognitive load. And certainly when you're looking through, if I look back on the first 4 months of the COVID crisis, for example, the cognitive load I was under during that time was enormous. We had dynamic, fluid situation which required high levels of quality decision making. And for me, I really had to bring what I use an acronym called my DESK policy: diet, exercise, sleep, and kindness to self.
That's lovely.
Kindness to self. And for me, it was like, of those 4, you have to do 3 of those at least well. When you're under that load, because I was under physical load, I was in front of Teams calls for sometimes 12 hours a day with no breaks. And I would walk out of my study here at home into the kitchen where my wife might be there. And I was like the Duracell bunny whose batteries had run out. And I literally didn't have the cognitive capacity to even have an engaging conversation. I would just be I'd be at 1% of the battery. And she would look at me and sort of go, my God, what's happened? I'm like, I've literally got no capacity for anything. And I would literally just sort of have something to eat, rest, and just go to bed early and make sure I was banking 8 hours or so of good sleep. But if I saw a gap in my diary, I might go, I'm going to go and ride my bike for a couple of hours. And the key within all of this is to not feel guilty about it.
Yes.
And for a lot of leaders, they get this guilt. This is not productive time. It's like, no, you've got to switch your thinking to this. Look, I need to make all these amazingly big decisions and affect people's lives. They affect our future outcomes. I have got to be in tip-top shape for those. So what am I doing to get myself in that tip-top shape? This is not wasted time. No. This is investment time in that outcome. And I think once you can get to that place, you can give up that guilt.
Yes. And the guilt is something I'm always trying to get people to drop. And like you say, people come in busy and the first thing they say to me is, I used to go to the gym and I used to eat well and I've cut down my sleep to do more work. And as you know, that's the things that are going to take you under. And I always say to them, go back to the gym, get your 8 hours. And it's lovely to hear you say 8 hours, because I know a lot of leaders say, oh no, I'm fine on 6. And it's like, well, if you read all of the research, you're not fine on 6. And all of that stuff it's so important. And that permission to be alone, I call it. And what I see is leaders, they feel so guilty about the long hours they're already working. Then they come out and they want to be kind of on for their partners or their families. And actually, like you say, being alone is just not allowed. It's just not on the agenda. And I always say to them, actually, you need to create alone time as much as you do for everyone else. And, make sure that your partner is getting their alone time too. This isn't a one-way street. And like you say, I remember getting texts from somebody, and it was a leader who was very high up in a company. And she said to me, I've just had a bubble bath. I'm just telling you, I've had a bubble bath. And it was lovely to see that she'd done that. But I thought, you've had to have permission from me to have a bath, to just have a long bath and read your book. And it's, winding people back down from that, like you say, there's no point, in some respects, there's no point you being in those 12 hours of meetings if cognitively you're not present anymore because you're gone.
100%.
It's
Mary,
so
I think
powerful.
there's something that's picked up, that I've picked up, I guess, over the past 14 or 15 months, which actually I think there's a lot of leaders close to burnout because of the tremendous pressures that have been caused over the last 15 months, just leading their organizations, keeping motivation up, keeping your eye on this dynamic, great big ball. And but it's very difficult sometimes for leaders to discuss that in an open environment because, of course, it's you get this sort of pushback of, well, you paid that to do that, aren't you? So just sort of shut up, get out the way and get on with it. Whereas the reality is that, that's not a great situation. And I know lots of leaders too. And behind the scenes, these conversations are happening, which is, I'm really struggling, and I really I'm not sure how much longer I can go on with this pace, this effort, this load. And it's like, wow, you kind of got to open up the pressure valve here, and you've got to bring a little bit back to you, and not just think that working these tremendous hours on the tremendous load is some sort of answer. The answer is working effectively, and not working long. And I guess in the early days of COVID, we just had, there's no choice. You had to work long. No discussion about that. That just needed to happen. But we're sort of emerging from this recovery phase now, and we need some decompression time. I think we all do as individuals, as humans, and as leaders to just decompress from where we've been, to recalibrate, and then to sort of come back into this refamiliarization of what work feels like, and leading, and the next normality is, I think, it should be high on our agenda.
I think it's lovely, and I love everything that you're saying. You're sort of the textbook case of where I would love everybody to be, but I know it's been a really tough journey for you to get there. And it's sort of my kind of final question before I ask you my set 3 that I always do is, I know that I work with a lot of leaders like you haven't come up the academic route, and they haven't gone to uni, and even though they're in that job, they're earning the 100k, the 200k, there's still that feeling of, oh, should I be here? Am I good enough? Am I intelligent enough? What was the turning point for you to be able to step over that?
I think that when you get to that point where perhaps you're working to a bigger purpose in your life, and what you have, what I just call total acceptance of self, and that is a very difficult place to get to for some people, because they can, even if you find your purpose, you've got to be happy with what you found. You might think about it and write down your purpose and think, well, I'm not really sure that's kind of, it's like diametrically opposed to where I am. And it's like, well, if that's the case, maybe you might need to change things. So I think when I got to this point of total acceptance of self, what I was beginning to realize was that I was looking at leaders who'd written books, or I'd go to conferences and I'd listen to what they'd say on stages and all this sort of stuff. And I'd be in an audience, and I would often think, I've got all of that. But I'd add that plus that to that last statement. And because what I felt they've missed is this about the human element. And I think I've got that. So I began to have, I guess, a growing confidence that because I knew who I was, I knew what my values were as an individual. I spent a lot of time working out what I call my vision, my mission, my values, and my principles. There was a very clarifying time in my life to sort of get this, who am I? The basic build the lighthouse about who I was as a person. And that was a very galvanizing moment, because when you totally accept what that is, then you really don't really care very much about what else other people might think. And you give up a lot of judgment. You don't overthink things much anymore, because all you become really focused on is actually, oh, this happened today. I had a reaction like that. And why did I react like that? Oh, well, that's because one of my values got compromised mid-conversation, and I didn't speak up. And you know what? Next time, I really need to speak up on that one. And it's because I was caught in a moment, caught unawares, or I was in a room with somebody really senior in the group globally, and I felt that couldn't be said. And one of my values is that silence is your agreement.
Yeah.
So that's one of my values. My silence is my agreement. But in that environment, I couldn't say something. And that's why. And so you become very focused on that sort of plan, do, check, act, rotating activity all the time about whether your vision, mission, values, and principles are right. They need small adjustments. You recalibrate. They inform all your decision making. They allow and inform what you say yes to, what you say no to, what your default reactions are, and in high pressure situations, all of these sorts of things. And going through that process, being very happy with the outcomes and the results, I think was a tipping point for me, and just sort of saying, this is who I am. This is me.
Yeah.
I'm totally okay with me.
Yeah.
And if you're not okay with me, that's equally okay. But I'm going to carry on being me. And I think that was a big breakthrough moment for me.
I think it's absolutely lovely. I do sort of values and mission statement. I make people make them, if they need it, I help them find a mission statement of who I am. And people tend to think mission statement, what I want to do. I'm like, no, this is who you want to be. And then you can add, your career goals and things onto it, but you need to know who you are. And I love the way you talk about scales. I talk to clients about recalibration scales becoming almost unconscious, so that you get that feeling when, like you say, when oh, this isn't feeling congruent and I need to say something, or yes, I didn't say something, hang on, and I say, once you clear all your baggage and you bring in the skill set that you have, actually you should have that lovely kind of tiny recalibration skills working unconsciously for you, so that in some respects, it's only when you become incongruent that you need to check in with yourself, because actually you are just living congruently. And I think it's so powerful, actually, so powerful.
Mary, that's so true. For me, I would just say that by knowing what congruency is, by definition, you know what it is not.
Yes, exactly.
And when you are feeling not, you can use your vision, mission, values, and principles to understand why.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
take corrective action or learn or do something which kind of brings you much more back to center. It's kind of like I find it difficult sometimes to live every single day with 100% congruency because so much happens. But in the main, that unconscious decision making now, I think, is where the power really lies. Is your brain is then programmed to know what to do. Yes. Unconsciously, without almost you needing to think about it, whereas in the past that behavior could not be serving you. And I that is almost the core of my work, is how do you get your unconscious, I think my book is Transform Your Mind to Excel as an Alternative Leader. It's transform your mind, get your mind to do the work for you. So it's because a lot of people say, I'm going to have to think of this and this and this, and I say, yeah, you will in the beginning, because it's like muscle memory. It's like, yes, I'm going to have to learn how to do a bicep curl, but actually then you'll just stand there watching telly doing them. No one will even think about it. And if you can get your unconscious to work, your conscious brain can do the everyday minute to minute stuff, with the unconscious just doing everything before. But I'm aware that we've run over time, and I've taken so much of your time already, but I think I could talk to you all day about this stuff. But thank you so much for sharing your story. But let me ask you these 3 questions that I ask every guest. So the first one is, people listening to you now, feeling inspired by everything that you said, what would you say is a first step, something if they think, right, I'm going to take action right now? What would you ask them to do or suggest they might do? Gosh, it's quite a tricky one, that, because to sort of get that journey of enlightenment, if you see what I mean, you've got to take the first step, I guess, in that process. And for me, what I think was the most galvanizing of all of those steps was actually defining my values, what do I stand for, and what I think kind of my life purpose wants, what I want that to be, who do I want to be within that, and devoting time to really think about that deeply. And that is not a sit down on a Monday with a notebook between 9 and 11 and try and sort of bash it out. It is a very iterative process that took me many, many months to sort of get to the answers. And I'd have some defaults, what's my red line on this issue or that issue. And when you start to think about that and grab it and write it down and then begin to have wordplay that says, well, it's that word more than that word, it begins to form. So I think the first piece, the major piece of advice is actually really is to really devote time to thinking about who you are and what you stand for. If faced with certain situations, where do you fall?
Yeah.
Can you give a black or white answer on this one, or can you not? Are you sat in the middle? Well, if it's not that, then it's probably not a value. It's more a sort of a generalized principle that guides your decision making. But on really big calls, where do you sit? That then, I think, becomes starts to become the template, knowing who you are, and you can evaluate so many things that sit around that. From the point, Mary, about who you spend your time with.
Yes.
Are they actually serving you? Are your friends, or are they just acquaintances that demand a lot of time but don't give you much? You really begin to get this sort of fog clearing clarity. So my top advice would be really spend some time to think about who you are and what you stand for.
I think that's brilliant. I do an exercise with people where I get them to clarify this, and it's interesting how many people sort of feel they've hit a brick wall with it, because they say, this is so huge.
Yeah.
How can I start to do it? And so what I always say to them is, do that 2 hours of sitting down, pen to paper, and then just let it be. And then what you'll find in your life is when something makes you either very, very passionate or very, very cross, it instills a huge emotion in you. Check in. What's going on for me right now that is making me feel this? Is it in there? And where does it go? And I also say to them to then regularly check in every three months, sort of for the rest of their life, because that might shift and change, and to allow it to be flexible, because I think that's really important too, because we do change, don't we, as we get older.
Mary, 100%. Never think it's finished. And I'm always tinkering with it, because an experience will happen to me, and I think, okay, something within me is making me feel uncomfortable. Right, go back, check a value. That's what it is. Maybe that word needs changing to now accommodate this new situation, and be completely okay with the fact that they're moving all the time, as we move as individuals in experiences and in age and wisdom and all of those sorts of things. So that's a really, really kind of good thing, because it becomes a self-audit tool.
Yes.
But more importantly, an acceleration tool, because actually then you know the things you become really passionate about, and you naturally gravitate where opportunity might not, for example, to sort of go, well, actually, that one really ticks all my boxes against my values.
Yes.
I'm passionate about that.
Yeah.
Faced with two opportunities, that is
That's the one.
It helps you inform it.
Yes, it does. I remember, I won't go into it, it's a long story, but I remember years ago, just as I was starting to really get to grips with this stuff, I took a job that was something like £15,000 less than the other one, which was a lot to me at that time, because we were quite poor at that time, just because I totally believed in the job. The job that was lower, and that was going to work in schools, and the other one was a more corporate role. And I loved it, and it certainly informed a lot of who I am now. But my second question to you is, looking back through the times where you have felt really challenged in life, were there any books or films or pieces of music even that really, either resonate with you from that time or really helped you actually through those times?
Yes. I gave a bit of thought to this, and I thought that there's a very unique answer to that question, which is there is one single piece of work which became a book, a film, and a piece of music.
Really?
Yes, and it was a book originally from 1970 by a guy called Richard Bach, and it was called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Hardly anyone's heard of it.
I have heard of it, but I don't think I've read it.
It's a fable. It's basically a fable about this sort of seagull that goes on, sort of, believe it or not, sort of a spiritual journey. And I always remember it because my mum used to have the album, which was recorded by Neil Diamond, believe it or not. And that went on to be a Grammy Award-winning album. The book itself was a bestseller back in the 70s. And so whenever I read that book or watch the film or even listen to the music, it really invokes emotion in me. And it reminds me of my mum and her struggle, and through her life, how she struggled to bring us up in the fact that she had a mother with severe mental health issues. And it just reminds me that actually how strong my grandmother must have been to survive her whole life with all those issues. How strong my mum must have been through her life to tackle that with my my grandmother, but for my mother having nothing to then manage to still get us, brought up, and how actually, even despite all of those conditions, both my brother, my sister, and myself have gone on to have really great lives. That piece of work just reminds me that actually, even in adversity, adversity is invariably always your greatest teacher.
It is indeed. That's lovely. I will order it. I remember looking at the title thinking, what is that about? And then, obviously passed it by. So I'll order that today. So my third one is, and it doesn't have to be related to anything that we've talked about, but if you were standing in front of the world leaders today, what would your message to them be?
Oh, detox your egos. You just sometimes you look on, and if you perhaps have some higher levels of emotional intelligence or self-awareness, and you just sometimes see these egos at play, and you just kind of go, look, there's a pretty big world in play here. And if we could just be a little bit kinder in the way that we try and approach things, and decision making and funding and everything about the way that we run the systems locally, nationally, internationally, I'm pretty sure we might end up in a better place. And you've only got to see some of the world leaders who, let's say, might be female, much more in touch, and just how well they seem to run their countries. And you just think, my goodness, if that model could be replicated, we might actually be in a slightly different new world order. So that would be for me is, detox your egos.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you so much, Phil, because I know that you're very, very busy, and I really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing, being very candid and sharing your background and your struggles and your journey to the top, as it were. And I'm sure that you've still got many more levels to reach as you carry on up through your career. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Mary, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Mary Williams, as you know, and thank you so much for listening to the Alternative Leader podcast. I search for guests to bring you lessons and learnings that can help move you forward in your life, help you achieve the success that you want to, in whatever way that shows up for you, to help you lead powerfully, whether that's in your own life, as your parenting, your personal, or your professional, and make you the best that you can be. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and review it, and please share it with as many people as you think also want to move forward and gain success in their lives. If you want to find out more about me, go over to my website, which is www.mari-williams.com. That's www.mari, which is MARI-williams.com, and you'll find links to all of my social media profiles there. There's also a Facebook community that you can join, and again, all the links will be on the website too. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day, and thank you so much for listening.